Well, good morning to you. Welcome to Bible Center. So glad that you're with us. I was told, Paula told me that this is the first time since she's been on staff here that she has set up for Christmas the week of Thanksgiving. But we're ready. It's December 1st. How many of you have your tree up? Okay, this crew, a ton more than 9:30. So you guys are the accelerated class here. This is awesome. You're ready for December and ready to roll. So maybe you did this morning. I don't know, but we're with you. We just felt like this year it was like, let's go. So this year is an interesting year because there are 4 Sundays in December prior to Christmas Eve. So that's how early we are, starting with today. And so we're going to kick off our Christmas series and our Christmas season this morning as we go all the way up through and into Christmas Eve, which is going to be a fantastic season for us. I've gotten the chance over the last 2 weekends to be in Nitro with Twin City Bible Church, which is a church that we are adopting. And I can just say that now. We are adopting this church to be part of Bible Center, and eventually will be a Bible Center campus, which is an exciting thing. And so I've gotten to welcome them and spend some time with them and enjoy this process with them. They're excited, and I think we are excited as well. We're headed into what we're calling an interim time period right now, which is an indefinite time. It's going to lead us till some unknown date in the future as of now that we will relaunch that campus as a campus of Bible Center. Likely next fall, maybe next winter. Before we get to that, we're just now starting to work on timelines and what needs to happen and who and all that kind of stuff. And so for those of you that have said, hey, I'm interested in doing something or being part of that or thinking about that at some point in the future, when we get to the new year, we're going to announce some interest meetings that'll take place kind of late winter, early spring. And so be watching for that, and we'll talk about those things. Then we're going to get through the holidays, and then we're going to really kind of turn our attention on getting this thing launched well. But exciting what God's doing there, and I'm excited to share a little more of that story as we go into the next weeks and months as well, and what we see God doing behind the scenes. As we move through our Christmas season, you'll notice that our services, our 9:30 and our 11 o'clock service throughout the month of December will be the same. So typically we have 2 unique services on Sunday morning. At 9:30 we call that the multi-gen service, and at the 11 we call that the modern service. But if you come at 9:30 or you come at 11, they'll be the same service as we go through the month of December. We feel like Christmas music and this time of year gives us the opportunity to do that. And so for our team, it's a great chance for them to just all work together, be on the same page as we move through this season. So if you're up early, you already got your coffee and your hot chocolate and you're ready to walk out the door and all that stuff, and you're here at 9:30, be the same service that you would get at 11. And so enjoy that as we go through the month of December. As we move toward Christmas Eve, this year for Christmas Eve, we're going to do 3 services. There'll be 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 6 o'clock. So as you're making plans for Christmas Eve and your schedules and your traveling and all that stuff, and also making plans to invite neighbors and friends to join you, Christmas Eve, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and just encourage you with that. Christmas Eve is a fantastic time together. Candlelight service that is very family friendly, so we're really looking forward to that. Our team has already begun practicing for that service, and so we're excited to celebrate Christmas together this year. As we start this series, there's a unique goal that I think our team has for us, both individually and collectively, as we begin this Christmas series. And it's kind of a bridge between the Thanksgiving season and the Christmas season this year. Kind of a way for us to bridge the two, because the goal is that we would have an even deeper level of gratitude for who Jesus is and what he has done. As we move from Thanksgiving into Christmas, I want us to carry this idea, this concept, because a lot of times we stop at Thanksgiving and we think, okay, let's be grateful. And then we move on to Christmas. And Christmas is celebratory, we anticipate, it's hope-filled, and all of those things are going to be true as well. But I would love for us to walk out of this Christmas season at the end of the month of December as we launch into 2025 with this abiding sense of gratitude that really has shaped us and will continue to shape us as we move into the new year. Gratitude, if you look up a definition for gratitude, you'll find some consistency there. And basically what it means is the state of being thankful. The state of being thankful. It's not necessarily the moment of being thankful. You know, you receive a gift and you say thank you, you know, or you sit around the Thanksgiving table and you go around and what are you thankful for? And there's a moment, you know, where we contemplate, what am I thankful for? What am I grateful for? But gratitude goes a little bit deeper to where it's this constant thing that we live in, this state of being where I am grateful. Not necessarily just for this thing or for that thing, but as a person, I am grateful. And as we go through this Christmas season, all the way through the month of December, that's my goal for us as a church, that we would come out of this month of December more grateful, more aware of what it means to live in gratitude. We're going to start in Isaiah chapter 9 this morning, and then we're going to go to John chapter 1. So if you want to turn in your Bibles to John chapter 1 and meet me there, that's where we're going to spend the bulk of our morning together. But it's built on what Mike read just a few minutes ago that we find in Isaiah chapter 9. And it's this verse 6. It says, "For a child will be born for us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders. He will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace." So we're going to look at those four things. Those four characteristics or descriptions of this coming Messiah, this Jesus who was going to come and rescue the world that Isaiah prophesied about. So as we move through this Christmas series, this Christmas season, we're going to spend each week, we're going to spend on one of those characteristics, one of those descriptions of Jesus. And so this morning we're going to look at Wonderful Counselor. What does it mean that Jesus is our wonderful Counselor? So the way my mind works is I started thinking about that word and you know how that's put together, and my mind immediately went to advice. You know, when you think about counseling or being counseled, you think about advice, right? And so I started asking some people on our team, what's the worst advice you ever got? What's the worst advice you ever got? And as soon as I said that, there were some smirks that came across your faces because you immediately knew that. Other people, it takes a little bit of time, but some of you in the room, you're like, I know immediately. So if you know immediately, what's the worst advice you ever got? Lean to the person next to you and tell them what it was. The worst advice that you have ever received. What is the worst advice? They're going to be shocked by what you share. So I asked some people on our team the same question. So what's the worst advice that you've ever received? What is that worst advice? And we were sitting in a meeting, and a couple of our staff members, Matt Garrison and Mike Graham, were in that meeting. And so Matt, in response to this question, I said, what's the worst advice you've ever received? And Matt had an answer. Immediately. He knew immediately what it was. And the worst advice that Matt Garrison has ever received, this is what he said. Someone told him, don't invest in Amazon. It's just a fluke. So yeah, I could see how that would be terrible, terrible advice, right? And Mike, not to be outdone, so Mike was sitting next to him, and Mike, in answer to the question, what's the worst advice, Mike, that you've ever received? Mike says, well, someone told me, you can fix that yourself. He knew this was coming. That's why he was trying to get me a little bit earlier. But I need to leave that up for a second. That's a handy-manny chainsaw, which is fantastic. And I love the electric cord coming out of the back, because if you've been around for a while, you've heard Mike talk about his electric chainsaw where he runs out of extension cord when he's trying to cut trees down. Worst advice that you've ever received. Some of the worst advice I've ever given was, you know, a lot of times when you give bad advice, it's because you're really not paying attention. You know, you're really not really reading cues or paying attention to what's going on. And that caught me one time. We were on a retreat with our executive team, which is our senior leadership team here, and we were going to go rafting for a day, which makes sense if you know me, right? And I just assumed everybody's going to want to go rafting. Everybody. Like, what's more West Virginia than rafting? And so we were rafting, and I had forgotten, because I've been, a million times, and I've been through the talk a million times, and I'd forgotten that when you go rafting, every company that you go to, they give you the life jacket, and they give you the paddle, and they give you the helmet, and then you go sit in a group, and they basically scare you to death. Like, that's the goal. That's the object. They want to tell you all of the ways that this could go horribly awry. And so they do that. So they sit you in a group. You're sitting there on shore with a life jacket and a helmet and a paddle, and they're trying to scare you. Like, they're trying to tell you why this could go bad. And again, I've heard this all, and I've given that talk before, and so whatever. But apparently, one of our team members, Stephanie Schaefer, who's the principal at our school, she'd never been rafting before. And I knew that, but it just, missed the cue. And so apparently, while this talk is happening, it is terrifying her. Like, terrifying her. And to the point where someone else on our team, Michelle, sees this because she's aware and sees social cues. So Michelle goes and sits beside her and says, "Hey, if you don't want to go, we don't have to go. I'll stay here with you and, whatever." And Stephanie says, no, I can do it. And so they get up and they start walking toward the bus, because we're walking toward the bus because that's, to go down the river, and we're walking toward the bus. And I see Stephanie, and I notice she's not exactly happy about this. And one of my clues was that there was mascara running down her face, which is a clue. And so I was so empathetic in the moment, I gave her the best advice ever. I said, "You'll be all right." You ever done that before? You're in a really, really hard moment. You'll be all right. I do that all the time. You'll be all right. You'll make it. Horrible advice. Not because it wasn't necessarily true, because she was all right, and she actually had a good time. It's not because it wasn't necessarily true. It's because it wasn't the words that she needed at that moment. It didn't speak life into her in that moment. And you probably relate to that as well. Another friend of mine shared with me that their family, they were struggling with having kids. Really hard struggle. Some of you have gone through that. Some of you are going through that. And a friend gave some advice. And the advice was, well, that must be God's plan. Not entirely untrue, but not the right moment, not the right words, not the right advice to speak into that space. And so as we come to this concept, this characteristic of Jesus as our wonderful counselor, we move beyond platitudes. We move beyond these moments of, bumper sticker theology. And we move into real life. What does it mean to have Jesus be our wonderful counselor? Because it means more than I think sometimes we think when we read these words, wonderful counselor. Wonderful is a word that we use to describe a lot of things in our culture today. You might have used it this morning when you woke up and you saw snow, if you woke up in time, because now it's gone. But if you woke up early this morning and you saw snow, maybe you looked outside and you went, "That's wonderful." Or maybe you got done with your Thanksgiving meal, or you were starting your Thanksgiving meal and you said, "This is wonderful." We use wonderful to describe lots and lots of things, but the writer of Isaiah here in the Hebrew Bible is taking this word in that context. It goes far beyond the way we would describe wonderful. In fact, it means miraculous. It has this idea of being a miracle or being incomprehensible or being unusual. Wonderful goes past the way we would use wonderful kind of as a passing comment. And it goes into this world where this is a miracle. And so as Isaiah is prophesying about the coming Messiah, he's saying this Messiah is going to be a miracle. Incomprehensible. Like you're not even going to be able to wrap your mind around how wonderful this one is. And then the word counselor in this context, in that time, was very much reserved for someone like a king. In fact, Solomon was referred to as a counselor. And so it kind of had a leadership connotation to it. Someone you would follow, someone that you would trust, someone who would give you wise counsel. And so you put these two together, and it's like this miraculous wisdom that is Jesus. This incomprehensible wisdom, this incomprehensible leader that is Jesus. This leader that is concerned for your well-being. And to the people who were reading these words or hearing these words when Isaiah first spoke them, they were living in this moment of darkness, in this time of darkness. This was about 800 years before Jesus came to earth. Isaiah lived in the nation of Judah. He was prophesying from the nation of Judah. And so 800 years before Christ came to earth, and the nation of Judah was at that point just really surrounded by the Assyrians. And it was kind of in and out, in and out, in and out, just until they fell. And so they felt this all around them, this oppression and this fear of what was going to take place in their life. They lived very much in a hopeless way. In some ways, they had felt like God had abandoned them. It's in those moments and in that context that Isaiah speaks this prophecy, speaks these words, that Jesus is going to come to earth, and he's going to come as a wonderful counselor. He's going to come as a miraculous leader that you can trust and that you can follow. We see that in Isaiah chapter 9. I'm going to read to you the first verse of this passage from verse 2. I'll put it up on the screen, and then we'll go to John 1, because I want you to see how Isaiah talks about Jesus, and then how John introduces us to Jesus as he arrives on the scene. So verse 2 of Isaiah 9 says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. A light has dawned on those living in the land of darkness." And so Isaiah is very much describing Judah at this moment. There's this darkness that you're living in, but there's going to be a day where light will come. So John introduces us to that. So you have various accounts of the birth of Christ. You go to Matthew, you see that. You go to Luke, you see that. So John comes at it a different way than the other accounts of the life of Christ come at it. And what you're going to see is a relation to this in the way that John introduces us to Jesus. And we were in John 1 this fall, but we're going to go back to that this morning. And so look at John chapter 1, verse 9. Start in verse 9. "The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world." So Isaiah says there's these people who are walking in darkness, and he's prophesying that they have seen a great light. And then John says in verse 9, as he introduces us now to Jesus, he says, "The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world." Verse 10, "He was in the world, and the world was created through him, and yet the world did not recognize him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, he gave them the right to be the children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of natural descent or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we observed his glory. The glory is the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." So I want you to see three things this morning that are about Jesus as our wonderful counselor. As we see this description, this characteristic of Jesus, how does it apply then to us? How does that matter? Why is that a big deal that Jesus is our wonderful counselor? Why would Isaiah pick that out as one of the four things that he would point out about this Messiah, this rescuer that was going to come into the land of darkness. So the first thing that we see here is that Jesus, as our wonderful counselor, establishes foundations. He establishes foundations. Look at verse 9 again. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. You could literally say the true truth. The true light, the true truth that gives light, that gives knowledge, that gives understanding, that gives wisdom was coming into the world. There's this pitting of these foundations that John immediately does in the first chapter as he introduces us to Jesus. He pits these foundations against each other. This foundation that is unshakable versus this foundation that is changing. This foundation that's steady versus a foundation that's unsteady. He introduces us to this foundation. And this foundation is so important because it's from there that everything else emanates. And we've talked about this a lot this fall, how your foundation matters. What you believe foundationally matters because from that comes everything else in your life. And so John, at the very beginning of his account of Jesus, as he introduces us to Jesus, says that Jesus as your wonderful counselor is a counselor that you can trust foundationally. When you go and talk to someone, if you schedule an appointment with a counselor and you go and you sit down on the couch and you have a conversation with them and you're asking them for advice on how you should live or the way you should do this or how you should approach this, understanding their foundation is going to be a key thing for you to understand whether you can trust that advice, right? How do they decide what is right and wrong? How do they decide what is good and what is beautiful? How do they decide what leads you to the best life, to your life flourishing? How do they decide that? And so John, right here at the beginning of his account of Christ, says, you can trust Jesus because he is the true light. He is the true truth. Foundationally, he brings absolute truth. And this is an argument that exists in our society today. It exists all around you. And you've probably heard it. You've probably engaged in it sometimes. How do we decide foundationally what is true? In fact, I was watching the other day as some friends of mine, they were debating an issue, a modern issue that we debate in our culture. And they were going back and forth, and there were like 90 comments on this thing. It was like happening in real time. Like they were really debating. And so I was just kind of paying attention because I was waiting for it to get to the place where you realize, oh, this is where they're starting from. Because where you start from is ultimately where you end up. And so you've got to boil it all the way down to where are you starting from? How do you figure out what's right? How do you figure out what's good? How do you figure out what's the best thing for society? How do you figure out what's the best thing for people? And ultimately it came down to the two people who were disagreeing on that fundamental truth, that fundamental foundational thing. And one of them alluded to the fact that, well, they believe in science. And it's not that I don't believe in science. I think science is a gift from God. It's a gift from God, and he uses that in our world, in our life to help us. But ultimately, it lives under the true truth. It falls subject to the true truth. And here's where I had the problem, is because he said, I believe in science because it's adaptable, because it changes, because it is different. And my question becomes, when you believe that way, when your foundation is changeable, when your foundation is shakable, how do you ever know that what you're believing is actually good and true and whole? And how do you know that when you discover something new that that's the right direction? Because it ever shifts and it's ever changing. And so John, immediately as he introduces us to Jesus, points to this unshakable foundation, this at the heart of the matter, the true truth, the true light that foundationally can be trusted. That I can build my life on that, and I can trust it. It exists in perpetuity. It doesn't change. It's not going to change tomorrow. It's not going to change 10 years from now. It is steady. It is constant. It is absolute. And as your wonderful counselor, he guides you based on that foundation. He guides you based on that foundation, not a foundation that shifts and changes, but on that foundation. Which leads us to the second thing then. He contrasts these pathways. So he establishes these foundations as our wonderful counselor, but then he also contrasts these pathways. Look at verse 10. He was in the world, and the world was created through him, and yet the world did not recognize him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him. Did you catch the contrast? John immediately introduces us to a foundation. The true light has come into the world. And then immediately after, he goes to this contrast. Those who choose to follow the true light and those who do not. So there's this pathway that this foundation puts you on. I either choose to trust in Jesus as my foundation, or I choose to trust in something else. And so let's see what he does here, where he introduces us to the something else. But to all who did receive him, he gave them the right to be the children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of natural descent, or of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. So there's two contrasting pathways. And the image here, the picture here from Isaiah to John is that literally the world was like stumbling around in darkness, attempting to find its own way, attempting to uncover truth, attempting to find the best way to live this life, attempting to find the way to happiness, the way to God, the way to eternal life. They were stumbling around in this darkness. And then when Jesus came into the world, he brought light so that we could see the way. But here's the contrast. It was built on him, not our own way. And so John contrasts it here by this. He says, to all who did receive him, he gave them the right to be the children of God, to those who believe in his name. So there's this qualification to that. You have to receive him. You have to receive him. To those who did receive him, he gave them the right to be the children of God. It's what followed receiving him. You get this right to be a child of God if you believe in his name. And you're believing in the fact that he is the Messiah, the one that Isaiah prophesied, the one that we celebrate Christmas around. Why we gather in this place, that Jesus was sent to earth to live the perfect life, to die as the perfect sacrifice, and to take my spot. And now he gives me the opportunity to have a firm foundation established and a path that follows him. In the contrast, he says in verse 13, not of natural descent or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. So there's this image, this darkness where I'm trusting in maybe my inheritance, maybe my parents' faith, maybe the way my parents have behaved, that's going to get me somewhere. That's going to get me to heaven. That's going to get me to eternal life. Or maybe my own understanding of the universe and the way things are put together, or the way that I see science and how it interacts with the world, and the way that I've defined good, and the way that I've defined right and whole, and what I think is happy and what I think is flourishing, and all of these will of the flesh, will of the man ideas. And John says, no, there's this contrast that the true truth has brought, where your life is built on Christ, and now you are following after him. And so the question for us as we enter Christmas, this season, is, am I going to trust the true light that came into the world? And by doing so, be given the right to be a child of God? Or am I going to trust my own stuff, my own inheritance, my own thoughts, my own way of seeing the world? The pathways are different based on the foundation that we choose. But here's the cool thing. The last thing that we see here that John introduces us to is this wonderful counselor. He doesn't just establish foundations, and he doesn't just contrast pathways and say, good luck to you. He gives himself. He gives himself. And this is the miracle that makes him wonderful. Verse 14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we observed his glory. The glory is the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. He gives himself. You know, most counselors that I know, and they're helpful and wonderful, and I'm so glad that we have counselors among us. But most counselors I know, you have to get online and make an appointment, or you have to make a phone call to an office and make an appointment, and then you go to that office and you walk in the office and you sit on a couch and you get maybe an hour to have a conversation. And you have this conversation and you lay out what you're dealing with, and based on what you're dealing with, then there's advice that comes back to you. The miracle of Christmas is that Jesus gives himself. He's not an appointment, but a presence. You don't have to make a phone call and make an appointment to get time with him. You don't have to wonder if you can get in. You don't have to wonder if am I going to have the time that I need? Christmas, the beauty of Christmas, the miracle of Christmas, is that Jesus is not an appointment, but a presence. It means that you have Jesus. You have Jesus. And you don't just have Jesus this morning as you're walking into this place and you sit in this room and we sing songs and we read from his word. You don't just have him this morning, but you have him as you walk out of this place and you walk wherever you're going next, and you have him tomorrow when you go to the gas station and the grocery store and to your kids' games and whatever it is that you're doing. You have Jesus. That's the miracle of Christmas. God with us. That he came and dwelt with us, and that he is dwelling with us. He's a wonderful counselor. He's a miraculous counselor because he is with us. Paul says in Jesus are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. You have that. You have that. Every moment of every day. Christmas takes us past Jesus' arrival and his departure and his living in heaven, and it takes us even past his death on the cross. You don't just get those things. You get him. Always. Forever. Eternally. This presence is an ongoing thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's a unique thing. It's a transcendent thing. It's a miraculous thing. And he is full of wisdom to transform you more and more into living the life he's designed you to live. So how do we respond? How do we respond to Jesus being our wonderful counselor? What do we do in response to that? Well, the first thing, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we respond with gratitude. We respond with gratitude for who he is, what he's done, and that he's with me. This state of being grateful. The presence of Jesus is ongoing. It's always, it's consistent, it's steady, it's with you always. And so the state of being gratitude should be responsive, always. I can't ask for more than that. There's nothing better, there's nothing more significant that I can get than the presence of my Creator in my life. So I respond with gratitude. And then the second thing is with dialogue. We have two habits here. We call them be in the Bible and talk to God. That's how you dialogue with this wonderful counselor. It could be on a couch if you'd like it to be. But that's how you dialogue. You read his word, what he has said, and then you talk to him. This two-way conversation. The Christmas season is a fantastic time to start reading your Bible if you haven't done it yet. There are all kinds of ways to do that. If you're on the Bible app, just search Christmas, Advent. Great plans that are on the app. I just started one this morning that came from Word of Life. I'll share it on the socials. It's 25 days leading up to Christmas. This is a great time. December 1st is a great time to start reading your Bible and talking to God. We respond to his presence with dialogue, acknowledging that he's with us. We're going to sing a song this season that the team is going to introduce to you this morning as we prepare our hearts for communion. I'm going to give you a few moments while they sing this over us, just to spend some time with Jesus. If you want to pray, if you just want to listen, whatever you want to do to prepare your hearts to take communion. It's a simple song. I think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll pick up on it really quick. It's just called Thank You, Jesus. So enjoy.